Black girl was dragged out of the room by Mafia boss. Then she destroyed his reputation. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Tiana Williams had always kept to herself. A quiet, sharp woman, she was used to being overlooked. Working as an assistant for one of the most feared men in the city, Vince DeMarco, she knew better than to challenge him or anyone else for that matter. Vince had a reputation that commanded respect, built on a life of crime and control. The kind of power that was unshakable, or so it seemed. Tiana had never let his presence intimidate her, but when he began to disregard her, belittle her, and act like she was invisible, something inside her started to stir. Today was different. She had just finished compiling a report, something that could change everything for Vince and his business dealings, when he walked into the room. His presence was like a storm cloud, dark and menacing. "You missed something," Vince growled, glancing at the report without even acknowledging her. His voice was cold, dismissive, as though her hard work meant nothing. Tiana stood her ground, keeping her gaze steady on him. She had dealt with worse. "I double-checked everything, Mr. DeMarco. It's all there," she replied calmly, her voice betraying no hint of fear. But Vince wasn't interested in facts or respect. With a flick of his wrist, he swept the report off the desk and onto the floor. "Don't talk back to me," he sneered, his eyes narrowing. The room fell silent, the tension thick as the air around them grew heavy. Tiana could feel her pulse quicken, but she refused to back down. His words stung, but she wouldn't let him see that. She was about to say something when he suddenly grabbed her by the arm, yanking her towards the door. "Get out," he ordered, his grip tight on her arm. Tiana's heart raced, but she didn't struggle. She was used to being pushed aside, but not like this. Not by him. The door slammed behind her as she was thrown into the hallway, her mind swirling. She could hear the muffled voices of the people inside the office, no doubt laughing at her expense. But something snapped inside her. She wasn't going to let him get away with this. She would make him regret it. Tiana pulled out her phone and began typing furiously. She had all the information she needed, all the proof. This wasn't just about her dignity anymore. It was about exposing Vince's dark secrets, the ones he thought he could bury. She had the leverage now, and she wasn't afraid to use it. As she finished sending the message, she stood tall, taking a deep breath. She knew this was just the beginning, but for the first time, she felt in control. Vince DeMarco had made a mistake, and Tiana Williams was going to make sure he would never forget it. The phone buzzed in Tiana's hand, the sound sharp and cutting through the tense silence of the hallway. She had just sent the message, the one that would change everything. She could already feel the weight of what was coming, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel afraid. She had nothing to lose now. Her heart raced, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She wasn't just a secretary anymore. She wasn't just someone who could be pushed around. She was a woman who knew the truth and was ready to expose it. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back. Vince DeMarco, the man who thought he was untouchable, would soon find out that the truth always finds a way to come out. Tiana took a deep breath and steadied her nerves. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew she had to move quickly. There was no time to waste. She was walking out of the building when she spotted someone across the street. A familiar face. It was Robert, the man who had been working with Vince for years. He didn't know her like Vince did, but she recognized him instantly. She knew he had his own set of secrets. She had seen him around the office, always lurking in the background, handling things for Vince, making sure the business ran smoothly. But he had a conscience, or so it seemed. She had overheard him talking to one of the higher-ups in the office, and she knew he wasn't as loyal to Vince as everyone believed. Tiana made her way toward him, her steps slow but purposeful. She had a plan, and Robert was going to be part of it. She needed someone on her side, someone who could help her take down Vince from the inside. Robert turned around as she approached, his expression guarded, but there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew her, but he didn't know what she was capable of. "Tiana," he said, his voice low. "What's going on?" Tiana didn't waste time with pleasantries. She needed him to understand the urgency. I have information, she said quietly, and I need your help. Robert looked around, ensuring no one was listening. What kind of information? The kind that can bring Vince down, she replied, her tone serious. Robert's brow furrowed, but he didn't say anything at first. Instead, he glanced down at the phone in her hand. What did you do? He asked cautiously. I've sent it, she said simply. And now I need you to back me up. I need your help to make sure Vince doesn't wiggle out of this. Robert hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing his options. He knew what kind of man Vince was, but he also knew the risks of getting involved. Are you sure about this? He asked, his voice softer now. Tiana looked him in the eye, her gaze unwavering. I'm sure. This is the only way. Robert took a deep breath. All right, he said finally. I'm in. But you need to be careful. Vince isn't someone you want to mess with. Tiana nodded. She was already well aware of the danger, but she also knew that this was her only chance. She couldn't afford to back down now. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady. Let's make sure the truth comes out. The two of them quickly made their way to the back entrance of the building, where Robert led her to a small office. It was quiet, the kind of place where no one would bother them. He locked the door behind them and sat down at his desk, motioning for Tiana to do the same. What exactly do you have? He asked. Tiana pulled out her phone and showed him the message she had just sent. It was an email to a reporter she had been in contact with for weeks, someone she trusted to get the story out. The email contained everything she knew about Vince's illegal dealings, his connections to organized crime, and the way he had manipulated everyone around him to build his empire. Robert looked at the phone for a moment, then back at Tiana. You've really done it, haven't you? He said, his voice tinged with admiration. Tiana smiled slightly. I have. And now it's time to make sure he pays for what he's done. Robert nodded. All right, let's do this. He turned to his computer and began typing furiously, pulling up the necessary files. We'll need everything in order, he said. We need to make sure this sticks. As they worked, Tiana couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She had taken the first step in bringing Vince down, and now she had the support she needed to finish what she started. This was no longer just about her dignity. This was about justice. And Tiana was determined to see it through, no matter what. Tiana stared at the screen, the glow of her phone illuminating her determined face. Robert was still typing, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard as he worked to gather more evidence, cross-reference information, and ensure every detail was meticulously documented. She felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. She had been quiet for so long, swallowed up by the shadows of other people's power, but now, for the first time, she was standing tall. She was ready to make her move, and there was no turning back. As the minutes passed, the weight of what she had just done began to settle in. She had sent everything to the reporter, the one she had been in touch with for weeks. The truth was out there now. The man who had humiliated her, the man who had controlled so many lives, was about to face the consequences of his actions. Robert leaned back in his chair and let out a breath, his eyes scanning the screen one last time before he looked up at Tiana. It's done, he said. Tiana nodded, though she still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. She had done everything she could, but would it be enough? Would it be enough to take down Vince, to expose everything he had built, to make him pay for what he had done? Now we wait, Robert added, leaning forward and folding his arms. But you did the right thing. You've given us a fighting chance. Tiana didn't respond right away. She was still processing everything, still trying to absorb the magnitude of her actions. Vince had been untouchable for so long, a shadow that loomed over everyone around him. And now, for the first time, he wasn't just the man in charge. He was a man with secrets that were about to be revealed. She could feel the weight of that truth pressing down on her, but she couldn't stop herself from wondering what would happen next. She had made a bold choice, one that could cost her everything. Her job, her safety, but there was something liberating about it too. She wasn't the same person she had been when she walked into that office earlier today. She wasn't just the assistant anymore. She was the one in control now. The next day, Tiana woke up with a knot in her stomach. She had barely slept, her mind racing through the events of the past 24 hours. She checked her phone immediately, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the notification. The story had been published. The details were out there for the world to see. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she read the headline. Mafia boss exposed. A web of corruption, crime, and deception. Her name wasn't mentioned directly, but the article revealed everything. Vince's ties to organized crime, his involvement in illegal activities, the way he had manipulated people to get what he wanted. It was all there, laid bare for everyone to read. Tiana stared at the screen for a moment, taking it all in. She had done it. She had exposed him. She had taken down the man who had once made her feel invisible, powerless, and small. But as she read the article again, a chill ran down her spine. This wasn't over. Vince was powerful, and he wasn't the type of man to just let something like this slide. He would come after her, and she knew it. But for now, she had a small victory. And that felt like the beginning of something new. As she walked into work that morning, the tension in the air was palpable. Everyone knew something was different. The whispers had already started. The article had spread like wildfire, and people were talking. Some were congratulating her, while others looked at her with suspicion. They didn't know what to make of it, but they knew that Tiana had played a key role in what had just happened. As she made her way to her desk, she could feel eyes on her. But she kept her head high, refusing to let fear creep in. This was her moment. She had stepped out of the shadows and into the light, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. At that moment, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Robert. "Be careful. Vince will come for you. But don't back down. You did the right thing." Tiana's heart pounded in her chest as she looked around the room. Vince had no idea what she was capable of, but soon, he would learn, and she would be ready. Tiana sat at her desk, the hum of the office around her, but she felt like she was in a world of her own. The article about Vince had been published, and now everyone seemed to be watching her, waiting for her next move. She could hear the whispers, some congratulating her, others skeptical, but she didn't let it faze her. She had come too far to let anyone's doubts stop her. She had taken down the man who had controlled so many lives, and she wasn't going to let him intimidate her now. The reality of her actions was beginning to settle in. She had exposed Vince's secrets, but she knew the battle was far from over. The real challenge would come when he realized what had happened. And when he did, there was no telling how he would respond. Tiana had taken the first step, but the war was far from over. As the day went on, the tension in the air grew thicker. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had done something dangerous, but in her heart, she knew it was the right thing. She wasn't going to let fear hold her back now. At noon, Tiana received a text message from Robert. "You're in the clear. For now. But don't think Vince won't make his move. Be ready." Tiana stared at the message for a moment, her thoughts racing. She knew Robert was right. Vince wasn't the type of man to back down without a fight. He would come after her, and she had to be ready. That evening, Tiana sat in her apartment, a cup of tea cooling in front of her as she stared out the window. The city lights blinked below, the streets bustling with life, but she felt detached from it all. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep up this charade, pretending to be just another office worker while secretly pulling the strings behind Vince's fall from power. But she couldn't stop now. She had come too far, and she wouldn't let him win. The phone buzzed again. Tiana picked it up, her heart pounding as she saw the caller ID. It was Robert. "Tiana," he said, his voice low. "I've been hearing things. Vince isn't going down without a fight. He's making moves. You need to be careful." Tiana's grip tightened around the phone. "What kind of moves?" she asked. "He's working behind the scenes," Robert replied. "He's trying to discredit the story. There are people out there looking to cover his tracks. You need to stay one step ahead." Tiana nodded, her mind racing. She had expected retaliation, but hearing it from Robert made it all the more real. "I'll be careful," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not backing down." Robert paused for a moment. "I know you won't. But remember, you're not alone in this. I've got your back. Just don't underestimate him." "I won't," Tiana said, a sense of determination settling over her. "I'm ready." The call ended, and Tiana sat there in the silence of her apartment, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on her. She had made a choice, and now there was no turning back. She had the power, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. The next few days passed in a blur. Tiana kept her head down at work, avoiding eye contact with her colleagues, but she knew they were watching her. The whispers had died down, but there was an undercurrent of tension, like everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She spent her nights gathering more information, reaching out to people who might be able to help her take down Vince for good. She knew she needed more than just the article to bring him down. She needed evidence. something concrete that would force him into a corner. Tiana had already sent everything she knew to the reporter, but she couldn't stop there. Vince was too powerful, too connected. If she wanted to win, she had to outsmart him. Late one night, as she sifted through the documents she had gathered, Tiana's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the name. It was a text from Robert. "I've got something. Meet me tomorrow. It's big." Tiana's mind raced as she read the message. She had no idea what Robert had found, but she knew it was important. She couldn't afford to waste time. The next day, she met Robert in a quiet cafe, away from the prying eyes of the office. He was already sitting at a table in the corner, his eyes scanning the room before he looked up at her. "You ready?" he asked, his voice low. "For what?" Tiana asked, sitting down across from him. "For this." Robert slid a folder across the table toward her. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the contents. Inside was a detailed record of Vince's financial transactions, including several offshore accounts that had been used to launder money. Tiana's breath caught in her throat as she flipped through the pages. This was the evidence she had been looking for. With this, she could bring Vince down for good. Robert leaned forward, his eyes intense. "This is what we need to finish this," he said. "We take this to the authorities, and Vince won't be able to escape." Tiana nodded, her mind already racing with plans. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. With this evidence, she could expose Vince for everything he had done, and she would make sure he paid for every single thing. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, but this time, it didn't scare her. It only made her more determined. She had come too far to stop now. Vince DeMarco's reign of power was coming to an end. Tiana sat in her small apartment, the quiet of the night wrapping around her like a blanket. The folder Robert had given her lay open on the table in front of her. The evidence was right there, detailed financial records that would bring Vince to his knees. She couldn't believe how close she was to taking him down for good. She had spent so many years feeling invisible, like she didn't matter, and now she had the power to destroy everything he had built. The weight of the decision was heavy on her shoulders, but there was no turning back now. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to stop. She had always been the one to sit quietly, to keep her head down, but not anymore. Not after everything Vince had done to her, to so many others. This was her moment. The phone buzzed, snapping Tiana out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw Robert's name. "I've got a contact at the FBI," his message read. "They're ready to move, but we need to act fast." Her heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She had everything she needed to bring Vince down, and now she had the people to back her up. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. Tiana grabbed her coat and walked out the door, her mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. She couldn't be sure how Vince would react once the truth came out, but she knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to go down without a fight. She had to be prepared for whatever came next. The next day, Tiana met Robert at a small cafe, away from the prying eyes of the office. She could feel the tension in the air as they sat down at a corner table, the weight of what they were about to do hanging between them. Robert slid a folder across the table, and Tiana opened it carefully. Inside were the final documents, everything they needed to make their move. "It's time," Robert said, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "We've got the evidence, and we've got the connections. Now we just need to make sure Vince is exposed." Tiana nodded, her heart racing. This was the moment she had been building toward. She had already sent the information to the reporter, and now she was about to hand everything over to the authorities. There would be no turning back. Once the FBI was involved. "Are you sure about this?" Robert asked, looking at her intently. "Once we go public, Vince won't be able to hide. He'll do everything he can to bury this." Tiana took a deep breath, her mind clear. She had been quiet for too long. This was her chance to take control of her life, and she wasn't going to let fear stop her now. "I'm sure," she said, her voice steady. "Let's do it." They stood up from the table, and Tiana felt a sense of resolve settle over her. She had spent years being afraid, but now she was the one in charge. With Robert by her side, they were going to expose Vince's secrets to the world. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and preparations. The FBI was ready to move in, and everything was set in place. Tiana could feel the tension building as the day of reckoning approached. She had done everything she could to make sure Vince was held accountable, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Would it be enough to bring him down? Would he go down without a fight? The day arrived, and Tiana stood outside the FBI building, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done her part, and now it was time to watch it all unfold. She knew Vince had many people in his corner, but with the evidence they had, there was no way he could get away with it. As she entered the building, Robert was already waiting for her. He gave her a nod, and they made their way to the conference room. The agents were already in place, ready to take action. "This is it," Robert said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. "We expose him today. No turning back." Tiana nodded, her eyes focused on the task ahead. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to let fear stand in her way now. As the meeting began, Tiana watched as the FBI agents began to go over the evidence, their faces hardening as they realized just how deep Vince's involvement went. The room was tense, the air thick with the weight of what was about to happen. Tiana could feel the energy shifting as the agents began to make their move. She had done her part. Now it was in their hands. The next few hours were a whirlwind of action. The FBI raided Vince's offices, seized documents, and arrested several of his associates. Vince himself was nowhere to be found, but the damage had already been done. His empire was crumbling, and it was all thanks to Tiana's courage. As the dust settled and the agents wrapped up their investigation, Tiana couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. She had done it. Vince's reign of power was over, and she had been the one to bring him down. She had exposed the truth, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she had control over her own destiny. She wasn't just the assistant anymore. She was a woman who had fought back and won. Tiana stood in the midst of the chaos, a strange calm washing over her as the FBI agents moved swiftly, collecting evidence, making arrests, and securing Vince's offices. She had done it. Her actions had set everything in motion. For so long, she had been invisible, unnoticed, and disregarded. But now she had done what so many thought was impossible. She had exposed a man who thought he was untouchable. The raid had only just begun, and already, Tiana could hear the faint whispers of people beginning to realize just how deep Vince's corruption ran. She had seen the worst of him, witnessed his arrogance, and now she had torn down his empire piece by piece. She could feel the weight of the situation, but there was no time for hesitation. She had come this far, and the final blow was about to fall. As she walked out of the building, her phone buzzed again. It was Robert. "It's done," his message read. "Vince is on the run, and his assets are being seized. He won't be able to escape this." Tiana felt a sense of relief flood over her. She had done what she set out to do. The next few days were a whirlwind. News outlets picked up the story, detailing Vince's illegal dealings and exposing his vast network of corruption. Tiana watched as the world around her changed. The man who had once humiliated her now the subject of scorn. She had done it. Vince DeMarco was finished. But as she watched the headlines flood in, she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't entirely over. Vince was resourceful, and if anyone could find a way out, it was him. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. There were still many unanswered questions. Tiana had spent so long in the shadows, afraid of what would happen if she took a stand. But now that she had, she realized there was so much more to her than she ever thought. She had power. She had control, and she wasn't about to give it up. A few days later, Tiana received a message from the reporter who had helped bring the story to the public. "The story is making waves," the message read. "But Vince has been quiet. It's too quiet. Are you sure he's not planning something?" Tiana stared at the screen for a moment, the weight of the reporter's words sinking in. It wasn't over. "Not yet. I'm ready," she replied. "I'll be watching." She knew Vince would come after her. He wouldn't just let it go. But this time, she would be prepared. This time, she would be the one in control. As the days passed, the investigation into Vince continued, with agents uncovering more of his illegal activities. But Tiana couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Vince had too many connections, too many people willing to protect him. She needed to make sure the story didn't die down, that it didn't fade into the background as other headlines took its place. She couldn't let Vince get away. One afternoon, as she sat in her office, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Robert. "I've got something. It's big," he wrote. Tiana felt her pulse quicken as she opened the message. It was a tip from one of Vince's former associates, someone who had turned on him, and it detailed a hidden account that Vince had been using to funnel money overseas. It was the smoking gun she had been looking for. This was the final piece of the puzzle. With this, they could bring him down for good. Tiana's mind raced as she read through the details, the path to Vince's downfall becoming clearer. She immediately forwarded the information to the FBI. This was it, the final blow. The agents would be able to trace the account, tie it to Vince, and use it to secure his arrest. Tiana had been patient, careful, and now it was all coming together. Later that day, she received a call from Robert. "It's over," he said, his voice filled with relief. "They've got him. Vince is being arrested. The accounts are frozen, and he's going to pay for everything he's done." Tiana felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had done it. She had taken down the man who had made her life a living hell. But more than that, she had found her voice. She had found the strength to stand up for herself and fight back. As she sat back in her chair, staring out the window at the bustling city below, Tiana knew that this was just the beginning. She had reclaimed her life, and no one would ever take that away from her. Vince DeMarco's reign was over, and Tiana Williams was finally free. Tiana stood in her office, the quiet hum of the city filtering through the window. It had been a week since Vince's arrest, and yet, she still couldn't shake the feeling that everything was happening too fast. The world had changed around her in ways she hadn't expected. People who had once ignored her now looked at her with a mix of awe and curiosity. She had become someone different, someone who had taken control of her life and had the power to change the course of her future. The day Vince was taken into custody, Tiana had felt a strange mixture of triumph and unease. She had exposed the truth, but she knew Vince wasn't the only one involved. There were still people out there who would do whatever it took to protect their interests. As the days passed, Tiana kept a close eye on the news, watching as Vince's empire continued to crumble. The story made headlines across the country. People began to question everything they had known about him. But the real change wasn't in the headlines. It was in the way Tiana saw herself. She wasn't the same person she had been a month ago. She had stepped into a new role, one that she hadn't even realized she was capable of. The shift was subtle at first, but it was undeniable. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't going to let anyone silence her or push her down. Tiana had done something that many thought impossible. She had taken down a man who had terrorized so many, and now she was the one holding the power. She had the respect of people who had once treated her like she was invisible. But as much as she had accomplished, there was still a part of her that couldn't let go of the fear that had always been there. She had fought for her freedom, but what came next? She wasn't sure, but she was ready to find out. One afternoon, she received an email from Robert. It was brief, but it sent a chill down her spine. "They're looking for you," it said. "Be careful." Tiana's heart skipped a beat. She had expected Vince's associates to come after her, but she hadn't thought it would happen so soon. She immediately called Robert, her mind racing. "What do you mean? They're looking for me?" she asked. Robert's voice was tense on the other end of the line. "There's a group of people who have been working for Vince, and they're trying to cover their tracks. They know you were involved, and they're trying to find out everything you know. They're not going to stop until they find you." Tiana's breath caught in her throat. She knew this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it feel all the more real. "What should I do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. "Lay low," Robert said. "Don't trust anyone. And keep everything close to the chest. I'll keep an eye out for you, but you need to stay one step ahead." Tiana hung up the phone and sat there in the silence of her office, her mind racing. She had known there would be consequences, but she hadn't realized how close they would be. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, settled over her like a cloud. It was one thing to take down Vince, but it was another to deal with the fallout. As she prepared to leave the office for the day, she glanced at the photo on her desk, a picture of her and her late mother. The memory of her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "You can do anything, Tiana. Never let anyone tell you you're not enough." Her mother's words had always been a source of strength for her, and now, more than ever, Tiana needed them. She had come so far, and she couldn't let fear stop her now. As the days went on, Tiana took Robert's advice and kept a low profile. She started working from home, only meeting with a select few people she trusted. She knew she couldn't be too careful. The people who had worked for Vince were dangerous, and they wouldn't hesitate to go after her if they thought she had information they could use. Tiana had made it this far by being smart, and now it was time to put her knowledge to the test. Every day, she felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she refused to let it break her. She wasn't going to hide forever. She would fight back. One evening, as she was reading through some old files, she received a call from an unknown number. Hesitant, but determined to stay ahead of anything that might come her way, she answered. "Hello," she said. There was a brief pause before a familiar voice answered. "Tiana, it's Robert." Tiana's heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tense. "I've got something," Robert said, his tone serious. "I've tracked down some of Vince's people. They're making moves, and I think they're getting closer to finding out where you are." Tiana's mind raced. She had expected this, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady. "We need to act fast," Robert replied. "I've got a plan, but I need you to be ready. This could be our chance to end this once and for all." Tiana nodded, feeling a sense of resolve settle over her. She had come too far to let fear control her now. She was going to finish what she started. With Robert's help, they would bring down the last remnants of Vince's empire. And this time, there would be no turning back. Tiana sat in the dimly lit room, her fingers tracing the edges of the files spread out before her. The weight of the situation had not lifted. If anything, it had grown heavier. She had exposed Vince, watched his empire crumble, but the storm was far from over. Robert's voice echoed in her mind. "We need to act fast." The last few days had been a whirlwind. The FBI had made progress, but they were still working on gathering the final pieces to ensure Vince's network would be completely dismantled. Tiana had been in hiding, carefully monitoring every move, every phone call, every email. She couldn't let her guard down. Vince's people were still out there, working in the shadows to pick up the pieces of the shattered empire. As much as she wanted to believe it was over, the reality was that she couldn't afford to be complacent. She had already exposed enough to ruin Vince's reputation, but if his associates found out how deep her involvement went, they wouldn't hesitate to target her. They were ruthless, and she couldn't take any chances. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her train of thought. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Robert. "They're getting close. We need to move now." Tiana's heart skipped a beat. The weight of the words hung heavy. She had known this moment would come, but it still caught her off guard. She had one chance to make sure everything she had worked for wasn't erased. She immediately stood up, grabbing her bag and the important file she had prepared. She couldn't waste any more time. It was time to act. The plan they had set in motion had to work. Robert had put his neck on the line, and so had she. She couldn't let him down now. They had come this far. Tiana hurried out of her apartment and into the night, her mind focused. The city streets were quiet, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. It felt like the calm before the storm. Tiana had always been one to stay in the background, but now she was the one calling the shots. Her decisions, her actions, had the power to change everything. She knew the risks, but she was no longer afraid. As she arrived at their meeting spot, a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, she saw Robert waiting for her. His expression was unreadable, but there was an urgency in his eyes. "We don't have much time," he said as soon as she approached. "The clock's ticking. We need to hit them before they regroup." Tiana nodded, her heart pounding. The final phase of the operation was underway. She couldn't afford to hesitate now. Robert handed her a folder, and she opened it to reveal the latest intel. It was everything they needed: details of Vince's remaining contacts, hidden accounts, and critical information that would ensure the end of his criminal empire. "This is it," Tiana said quietly. "We take them down now." Robert's eyes narrowed. "Exactly. The authorities will be ready. We just need to make sure everything's in place." As they finalized the plan, the weight of what they were about to do settled in. Tiana had come a long way from the scared assistant who had once hidden in the shadows. Now, she was the one holding the reins. It was a strange feeling, empowering, but with a sense of uncertainty. This was the final test. If they succeeded, Vince and his associates would be behind bars. If they failed, the consequences could be catastrophic. But Tiana wasn't going to let that happen. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Robert and Tiana worked together seamlessly, coordinating with the FBI to ensure that every move was executed perfectly. The agents were in place, the surveillance set up, and the evidence gathered. Vince's associates didn't stand a chance. As they made their final preparations, Tiana couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. She had taken control of her life, and now, she was about to take down one of the most powerful men in the city. The feeling of power, of knowing she had the ability to change the course of history, was something she had never experienced before. It was exhilarating. As the operation began, Tiana watched from a distance as the FBI moved in, arresting Vince's remaining associates and seizing crucial evidence. It felt like watching a story unfold, but this time, she was the one writing it. When the dust settled, Vince's empire was no more. The city had been shaken to its core, and the ripple effects of his downfall would be felt for years to come. Tiana couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She had done what so many thought was impossible. She had fought back, exposed the truth, and taken down the man who had terrorized her and so many others. She was no longer a victim. She was a victor. The next morning, Tiana woke up to the sound of her phone ringing. It was Robert. "It's over," he said, his voice filled with relief. "We did it. Vince is gone." Tiana smiled, but there was no time to celebrate. The real work was just beginning. They had won the battle, but the war was never truly over. She had learned that much. As Tiana sat in her apartment, staring out at the city skyline, she knew that she had changed the course of her life. She wasn't the same person she had been when this all started. She had become someone stronger, someone who had the courage to stand up for herself and fight back. And with that, she knew that whatever came next, she would face it head-on. Tiana sat at her desk, her hands trembling slightly as she scrolled through the latest news updates. The fallout from Vince's arrest was spreading faster than she had anticipated. Headlines were everywhere, and people were starting to talk. It felt surreal, like she was reading about someone else's life. Vince, the man who had once terrorized her, had been exposed for the corrupt, manipulative criminal he was. The empire he had built was crumbling, and Tiana had been the one to bring it down. But even as she read the articles, a part of her remained wary. The victory felt incomplete. She had taken down Vince, but his influence had touched so many lives. There were still people in the shadows, still those who might try to pick up where he had left off. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. A soft knock on the door snapped Tiana out of her thoughts. She looked up, and Robert stepped inside, his expression serious but relieved. "It's really happening, isn't it?" Tiana asked, her voice filled with a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. Robert nodded. "Yes, Vince is finished. But we've got to make sure his influence doesn't creep back in. There are still people who could try to take advantage of the power vacuum." Tiana nodded, her mind already racing. She had known that dismantling Vince's empire wouldn't be as simple as his arrest. The wheels of his operation had been turning for years, and there were still pieces of the puzzle left to solve. "What do we do next?" she asked, her voice steady. Robert pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "We make sure that no one tries to fill his shoes. We start by finding out who's still working behind the scenes. Vince had a lot of people in his pocket, but we can't let anyone go unnoticed." Tiana's heart skipped a beat. She had worked hard to expose the truth, but now it was time to ensure that Vince's legacy didn't live on in other ways. "I'll help you however I can," she said firmly. "We're in this together." The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and research. Tiana worked alongside Robert, tracking down Vince's remaining associates, piecing together the last bits of information that could help them fully close the door on his criminal empire. It was like chasing shadows. Every time they thought they had cornered someone, another name, another connection would surface. But Tiana wasn't backing down. She had come too far to stop now. One afternoon, as Tiana was reviewing a list of people who had been connected to Vince's operations, she received a call from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat as she answered, unsure of what to expect. "Tiana," a voice said, "it's me." She immediately recognized the voice. It was Jordan, one of the key people who had worked with Vince in the past, but had managed to stay out of the spotlight. Jordan had always been a wild card, someone who walked the line between being loyal to Vince and keeping a low profile. "What's going on?" Tiana asked, her voice guarded. "I know what you're doing," Jordan replied, "and I'm not here to stop you. But you should know that Vince's connections go deeper than you think. He had friends in high places, people who will do whatever it takes to protect their interests." Tiana's pulse quickened. She had always known that Vince's network was vast, but hearing it from someone who had been inside made it feel real in a way it hadn't before. "So, what's your angle, Jordan?" she asked, her suspicion rising. "I'm offering you a warning. Jordan said. There are people out there who won't stop looking for a way to recover what they lost. You've got the evidence, but there are still pieces of the puzzle you don't see. Tiana felt the weight of the words settle over her. She had always known that there would be more to this than just Vince's arrest. The real test would be whether they could root out the rest of his network before it regrouped. So, what do you want in exchange for this warning? Tiana asked, her tone sharper now. I'm not asking for anything, Jordan said. I'm just telling you to watch your back. And don't think you've won just because you exposed Vince. There are still people out there who don't want you to succeed. The line went silent, and Tiana sat back in her chair, staring at the phone in her hand. The warning felt like a threat, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. She knew that the game was far from over, and if Vince's network was as deep as Jordan suggested, they were only scratching the surface. Over the following days, Tiana couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. She kept digging into Vince's past, trying to uncover any remaining connections that could pose a threat. It wasn't long before she found something, an offshore account tied to several high-profile individuals who had worked with Vince. It was a piece of the puzzle she hadn't expected, but it could be the key to finally bringing everything to light. As she sat at her desk, the weight of what she was about to do settled over her. She had already exposed Vince's criminal activities, but now she had to go deeper. She had to make sure that no one would be able to pick up where he had left off. This was her chance to finish what she started. Tiana reached for the phone and made the call. The next few hours would determine whether Vince's influence truly had ended, or if the shadows would rise again. The call was brief, but the impact was immediate. Tiana knew that the final chapter was about to be written, and this time, she would make sure there were no loose ends. The world had already seen the fall of Vince DeMarco, but the people who had worked with him still needed to be held accountable. And Tiana was the one who would make sure of it. Tiana sat in her office, the silence of the room pressing in on her. The past few days had been a blur of activity, of meetings, calls, and information. Every day felt like a new battle in the war she had started. The pieces of Vince's empire were slowly falling apart, but Tiana knew that this was only the beginning. She had exposed his network, but the people who had been involved were still lurking in the shadows. Some had already been arrested, but others were still out there, trying to hide their tracks and protect their interests. Tiana couldn't let her guard down now. The warning from Jordan echoed in her mind. Asterisk, don't think you've won just because you exposed Vince. Asterisk, she wasn't going to take any chances. She had to make sure that no one else would be able to pick up where Vince had left off. The truth had to be uncovered completely. As she sat there, looking over the documents on her desk, she heard a knock at the door. Robert stepped inside, his expression tense. We've got a lead, he said, his voice low. Tiana looked up, her eyes narrowing. What kind of lead? She asked, already feeling the weight of what was coming. There's a name that keeps coming up, Robert replied, taking a seat across from her. A lawyer who was involved with Vince's offshore accounts. We think he might know more about the people who are still trying to protect Vince's empire. Tiana's mind raced. If this lawyer knew anything about Vince's remaining associates, it could be the break they needed. Where do we find him? She asked, already reaching for her phone. Robert hesitated for a moment, glancing down at the papers in his hands. We're still tracking him, but he's been elusive, changing locations and using false identities. It's going to be tricky. Tiana clenched her jaw, frustration bubbling up inside her. But she knew Robert was right. These people weren't going to make it easy for them. We don't have time to waste, Tiana said, her voice firm. We need to act quickly before they slip through the cracks. Robert nodded in agreement. I'm with you. We'll find him. The next few days were filled with tension as they worked to track down the elusive lawyer. Tiana spent every moment digging through information, combing through Vince's financial records, and contacting people who might have known where to find him. It was like chasing ghosts, but she wasn't going to stop. She had come too far to back down now. Then, one evening, as Tiana was about to leave the office, she received a call. It was Robert. I've got him, he said, his voice filled with urgency. Tiana's heart raced. Where? She asked, grabbing her jacket and heading for the door. He's at a law office downtown, Robert replied. We've got eyes on him. It's time to move. Tiana's pulse quickened as she made her way to the car. This was it. They were about to get the information they needed to finally close the book on Vince's empire. As she and Robert arrived at the law office, they could feel the weight of the moment. This was the final piece. If they could get the lawyer to talk, They would have everything they needed to ensure that Vince's associates wouldn't be able to pick up the pieces. They carefully approached the building, their footsteps echoing in the empty street. It was late, and the city felt strangely quiet. As they entered the office, Tiana's breath caught in her throat. There he was, the lawyer. He was seated at a desk, a look of surprise flashing across his face as he looked up at them. "You're the ones who brought down Vince," he said, his voice shaky. Tiana didn't waste time. "We know everything," she said, her tone cold and direct. "And we're going to make sure you're held accountable for your part in this." The lawyer's face paled, and for a moment, it seemed like he might try to run. But instead, he sat there, staring at them, his mind racing. Tiana didn't give him the chance to think. "We know about the offshore accounts," she continued. "We know about your connections to Vince's network. The question is, how much are you willing to give up to save yourself?" The lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting between Tiana and Robert. "I don't know anything else," he said, his voice low. "Vince made sure I didn't know the full picture. I was just doing my job." Tiana leaned in, her gaze intense. "You're lying," she said. "And you're going to help us put the final nail in Vince's coffin. You don't have a choice." The lawyer hesitated for a moment, his fear clear. Then, with a resigned sigh, he spoke. "Okay," he said. "I'll help you. But I need protection. I can't do this alone." Tiana and Robert exchanged a quick glance. This was the moment they had been waiting for. They had the information they needed. With this lawyer's testimony, they could finally close the case and ensure that Vince's network would be completely dismantled. "You'll have protection," Robert said, his voice calm. "But only if you cooperate fully." The lawyer nodded, and Tiana could see the fear in his eyes. He had no choice but to comply. As they left the office, Tiana felt a sense of relief wash over her. This was it, the final step in taking down Vince's empire. The lawyer's cooperation meant that they had the key to dismantling what was left of the operation. But even as she felt the weight lift from her shoulders, she knew the fight wasn't over. It never really was. But with this final piece of the puzzle, Tiana knew they had won. Tiana sat in her apartment, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The events of the past few weeks had unfolded faster than she could have ever anticipated. The last piece of the puzzle, the lawyer, had finally provided them with the information they needed. Vince's empire was crumbling, but the work wasn't over yet. Now, they had to make sure every last link in the chain was severed. Robert had been working tirelessly with the authorities, coordinating with the FBI to ensure Vince's network wouldn't resurface. But even as the pieces of the operation fell into place, Tiana knew there were still lingering threats. The people who had been loyal to Vince wouldn't just give up. They were dangerous, and they would do anything to protect their interests. Tiana had come a long way since the days when she had kept her head down and let people walk all over her. She had fought for her dignity, for justice, and now, she was at the forefront of dismantling one of the most powerful criminal operations the city had ever seen. It wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore. It was about ensuring that Vince's legacy was erased completely. She thought about everything she had sacrificed to get here. The sleepless nights, the fear, the constant pressure. But she had done it. She had made sure the truth came out. And now she had the chance to make sure the people who had enabled Vince's actions were held accountable. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Robert. "We've got the final piece," he said, his voice urgent. "The lawyer gave us the last of the connections. We've got them all." Tiana's heart raced. This was it. They had everything. They needed to ensure that Vince's empire was permanently destroyed. "Where do we go from here?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through her. "We go public," Robert replied. "We make sure everyone knows what Vince was really doing behind the scenes. And we tie up the last of the loose ends. Once we do that, it's over." Tiana nodded, her resolve hardening. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to stop now. "Let's do it," she said. Over the next few days, they worked quickly. The FBI had already moved in, arresting Vince's remaining associates and collecting crucial evidence. Tiana's name had been cleared, but she wasn't done yet. She wanted to make sure there was no room left for Vince's influence to creep back in. As the days turned into weeks, the operation unfolded smoothly. The public was shocked when the full story came out. People who had once been intimidated by Vince's power began to speak out, sharing their experiences. It was like watching a tidal wave of truth break over the city. Tiana had never imagined she'd be the one to bring down such a powerful figure. But now, as the story played out in the news and across social media, she realized just how much of a difference one person could make. Yet, even as she watched the city react, Tiana couldn't help but feel a lingering unease. Vince was in prison, his empire had been dismantled, but there were still people who might try to rebuild it. She knew better than anyone how deep Vince's connections ran, and it wasn't over until every last person who had aided him was held accountable. One morning, a few weeks after the final arrests were made, Tiana was reviewing some final reports when she received another unexpected call. It was from the lead FBI agent on the case. "Tiana," the agent said, his voice serious. "We found something. A final link in the chain." Tiana's stomach dropped. She had thought everything was wrapped up, but the agent's tone told her otherwise. "What did you find?" she asked, bracing herself. "It's another associate of Vince's, someone who's been hiding in plain sight. They've been moving money, laundering it through legitimate businesses. We need to move on this now before they have a chance to slip away." Tiana felt a surge of determination. It wasn't over yet. Vince's network may have been fractured, but it wasn't completely gone. She wasn't going to let this last person get away. "What can I do to help?" she asked, already preparing herself to take action. "We need you to come in," the agent replied. "You've been working this case from the inside, and we need your insight. You'll be our best chance at catching them before they disappear." Tiana didn't hesitate. She knew this was her moment to finish what she started. She had come too far to let anyone slip through the cracks now. Later that day, she met with the FBI team at their office, where they briefed her on the final lead. The person they were after was someone who had worked closely with Vince, laundering money through seemingly legitimate businesses. They had used multiple identities, and now, they were on the verge of disappearing again. "We need to act fast," the agent said. "This person has connections all over the city, and if we don't move now, they'll vanish." Tiana nodded, her mind working quickly. "We'll get them," she said, her voice firm. The team quickly mobilized, and Tiana worked with them, using her knowledge of Vince's operations to help track down the final associate. It was a tense few hours, but Tiana's determination paid off. They found the person hiding in plain sight, operating under a new identity. With the FBI's help, they made the arrest, ensuring that the final piece of Vince's empire had been taken down for good. As the operation concluded, Tiana couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The city had been saved from Vince's corruption, and she had played a key role in making that happen. She had gone from being the assistant, overlooked and ignored, to being the person who brought down a criminal empire. But more than that, she had reclaimed her life. She had taken control, fought back, and won. And now, as she stood in the aftermath of the operation, she knew that this was only the beginning. She was ready for whatever came next. Tiana stood in front of her apartment window, looking out at the city below. The lights twinkled like a sea of stars, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had filled her life only weeks ago. She had been through so much. From the moment she decided to fight back, her world had changed completely. Vince was behind bars, his empire shattered, but Tiana knew better than to think that everything was settled. It wasn't just about taking him down anymore. It was about making sure the remnants of his influence didn't linger in the shadows, waiting to resurface. Robert had been a constant presence throughout the whole ordeal. They had worked together seamlessly, gathering evidence, finding allies, and dismantling the last pieces of Vince's empire. He was the one who had kept her grounded when the pressure of it all felt like it would break her. And now, as the dust finally seemed to settle, Tiana found herself wondering what came next. She had done everything she set out to do, but the sense of uncertainty lingered. Would she ever be able to truly relax? Was there something else she had to face before she could finally move on? Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was Robert. "We've got a new lead," the message said. Tiana's stomach dropped. She had expected that it wouldn't be over so easily. It never was. She immediately dialed Robert's number, her mind racing with possibilities. "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We've got someone from Vince's old circle who's been reaching out," Robert explained, his voice low. "They've been laying low, but we think they're ready to talk. This could be our final piece." Tiana felt the weight of the words settle over her. One last piece. She had thought everything was wrapped up, but here it was again, a new lead, a new challenge. "Where do we go from here?" she asked, her determination rising once again. "Meet me at the office. We'll figure out the next steps," Robert replied. Tiana grabbed her coat and made her way out the door, her mind already focused on what they needed to do. She wasn't sure what this new lead would bring, but she knew they couldn't afford to take any chances. As she arrived at Robert's office, she could see the tension in his eyes. He handed her a file, and she opened it carefully. Inside was the name of someone who had been a key player in Vince's operation. The person had been on the fringe, not directly involved in the day-to-day dealings, but enough to know everything that had been going on. "Do we trust them?" Tiana asked, her fingers brushing over the file. "We don't have much choice," Robert replied. "This could be the last of Vince's network. If we get this right, we'll have everything we need to completely shut it down." Tiana nodded. "Then let's do it." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Tiana worked with Robert to coordinate with the authorities, making sure they were ready for whatever this new lead would bring. She had come so far, but she knew this last step could be the hardest. The people involved in Vince's empire had been ruthless, and if they thought they could escape, they would fight tooth and nail to protect themselves. But Tiana wasn't going to let that happen. She wasn't going to stop now. The day arrived, and Tiana felt a mixture of anxiety and resolve as she met Robert outside the meeting place. The person they were going to meet had insisted on remaining anonymous for now, but Robert had managed to set up a secure location for the meeting. They arrived early, walking through the empty streets of the city as the sun began to set, casting long shadows on the ground. It felt like they were walking into a new chapter, a final showdown that would determine the future of everything they had worked for. When they reached the location, a small cafe on the corner of an unassuming street, Tiana felt a sense of familiarity. It was a quiet place, perfect for a discreet meeting. As they entered, Robert immediately spotted the person they were meeting, an older man sitting at the back of the cafe, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. Tiana followed Robert to the table, and the man looked up as they approached. "You're Tiana," he said, his voice rough but not unfriendly. "I've heard about you." Tiana didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You know why we're here," she said, her tone firm. The man nodded slowly, glancing over at Robert before returning his gaze to Tiana. "I know a lot about Vince's operations," he said, his eyes narrowing. "But it's not easy to trust anyone. People like Vince have a way of making you doubt everything." Tiana leaned in, her voice low. "We don't have time for doubt. We need to know everything you know. If you have information that can help us end this, now's the time to share it." The man hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "All right," he said. "I can help you. But you need to understand something. Vince wasn't just some criminal. He had connections that go beyond what you've seen. People you don't want to mess with." Tiana held his gaze, unflinching. "I'm not afraid of him or his connections. I'm here to make sure it ends. You're going to help me, or you're going to regret it." The man nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of respect and fear. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small notebook. "This is everything," he said, sliding it across the table. "Names, places, deals. It's all here. You take it to the authorities, and Vince's network will be finished for good." Tiana took the notebook, feeling the weight of it in her hands. This was it, the final piece. She had the information she needed, and now she had to make sure it was used to bring down every last person who had been involved. As they left the cafe, Robert turned to her. "This is it, Tiana. We've got everything. It's time to end this." Tiana nodded, her heart steady. She had fought for this moment, and now it was finally within reach. Vince's empire was no more, and Tiana Williams had been the one to bring it all down. Tiana stood at the entrance of the courthouse, the air crisp and cool around her. She had come so far, and now the final chapter of her journey was about to unfold. The information they had gathered, the connections they had broken, and the countless hours of work were all leading to this moment. Vince's empire had been shattered, but there was still one last thing to do: ensure that justice was served. She glanced down at the folder in her hand, the final piece of the puzzle. The notebook the lawyer had given them held the names, the details, everything that was needed to make sure every last person who had been part of Vince's operations was held accountable. The authorities had already acted on much of the information, but now it was time for the public to see it all unfold. As Tiana walked into the courtroom, she felt a mix of emotions. The weight of what she had done was immense, but there was also a sense of pride. She had fought for what was right, and now she was about to witness the end of Vince's reign. Robert had been with her every step of the way, and he stood beside her now, his presence a silent reassurance that they had made it through together. They had come from the shadows, from a place where Tiana had felt invisible, and now they were standing at the center of it all. The trial was set to begin, and it was expected to be one of the most high-profile cases the city had seen in years. The names that would be revealed in court were enough to shake the foundations of the city's elite. People who had once been untouchable were now facing the consequences of their actions. Tiana took a deep breath and stepped into the courtroom, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was packed with people, the media, lawyers, witnesses, and the public. Everyone there to watch the downfall of one of the most powerful men in the city. Tiana's eyes locked onto the defense table, where Vince sat, looking eerily calm. His once pristine appearance was now marred by the weight of his situation. He had been stripped of his power, but the arrogance in his eyes remained. It was as if he still believed he could control the outcome of this trial. Tiana couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She had seen firsthand what Vince was capable of, the way he used his power to manipulate and destroy people. Now, he was the one facing the consequences of his actions. The trial began, and the prosecution laid out its case. Piece by piece, they presented the evidence that Tiana and Robert had worked tirelessly to uncover. The offshore accounts, the money laundering, the corrupt deals, all of it was laid bare for the world to see. Tiana sat in the courtroom, watching as the pieces fell into place. It was surreal, seeing the information she had uncovered become the key to bringing down Vince's empire. But as the trial progressed, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something missing, something that hadn't been fully addressed. She turned to Robert, her brow furrowed. "We're missing something," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the proceedings. Robert looked at her, his expression serious. "What do you mean?" Tiana's mind raced. The information they had gathered was comprehensive, but there was a nagging feeling in the back of her mind that they hadn't caught everything. Vince had been smart, meticulous even in his criminal activities. There had to be one last piece to the puzzle. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning the courtroom. It wasn't just about exposing Vince anymore. It was about making sure there was no chance for his influence to creep back in. "I think there's one last person we need to bring into this," she said, her voice low. Robert raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Tiana paused, her heart racing as the realization hit her. It was a name she hadn't thought about in a while, but now, it made perfect sense. The one person who had been quietly working behind the scenes, making sure everything ran smoothly for Vince. It was someone who had escaped their notice, until now. "I'll explain later," Tiana said, standing up. "We need to find them. Now." Robert nodded, his expression hardening. He trusted her instincts. "I'll get on it," he said. As Tiana left the courtroom, her mind was already working through the possibilities. She wasn't going to let this last person slip away, not after everything they had fought for. She couldn't allow one last shadow of Vince's influence to remain. Later that night, Tiana and Robert met at a small cafe, far from the prying eyes of the courthouse. The tension was palpable as they sat down. Robert had gathered the information Tiana had requested. "You were right," he said, sliding a folder across the table to her. "This is the person who's been helping Vince cover his tracks. We need to move fast before they disappear." Tiana opened the folder, her fingers trembling as she read through the details. The person they were looking for had been working alongside Vince for years, but had managed to stay under the radar. Now, with Vince behind bars, they had nothing left to lose. "We'll get them," Tiana said, her voice resolute. "This ends now." The next few days were a blur of action. Tiana and Robert worked with the authorities, tracking down the final person who had been part of Vince's operation. It wasn't easy. They had to be careful, move quickly, and stay ahead of any attempt to cover their tracks. But eventually, they found the person they were looking for, a key figure in Vince's network who had been pulling strings behind the scenes. With their capture, the final chapter of Vince's empire was closed. Tiana stood in the aftermath, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Vince was finished. His network had been dismantled, and she had been the one to bring it all down. She had found her voice, reclaimed her life, and made sure the people who had done wrong were held accountable. As she walked away from the courthouse, Tiana looked up at the sky, the weight of everything she had accomplished finally sinking in. The city felt different now. She felt different. And for the first time in a long time, Tiana was truly free.